There's plenty of contention that surrounds the state of the gaming industry. On one hand, the infection of microtransactions, remakes, reboots, prequels, sequels, requels, and unoriginality leads to some declaring an inevitable crash to descend upon us. While on the other, we've gotten loads of top-notch games in a wide variety of genres. Doom, Dark Souls, Overwatch, Hitman, Resident Evil, Siege, Zelda, Project Cars, Injustice, XCOM, Witcher, and Titanfall. And not only in the AAA space, in 10 years indie games went from flash projects on Newgrounds to Rocket League, Inside, Witness, Stardew, Firewatch, Superhot, Fez, Fury, Hyperlight, Shadowrun, Spelunky, Meat Boy, Rainworld, Rimworld, Transistor, Eurotruck, and so much more. There doesn't seem to be a lack of selection in heavily celebrated titles that are enthralling thousands of players around the world. But we'll always be missing something key to our past, and in the current landscape, it's the middle market game. Developers in the current age have found themselves locked into one extreme of the industry, dumping copious amounts of cash into the biggest games on the market, aligning and compromising your work to the tune of investors and bosses breathing down your neck, wanting assurance that you'll be catering to the widest demographic possible. Or writing, coding, designing, networking, promoting, testing, fixing, and releasing your work for pennies a week to be shared across less employees in a hot dog stand. Until now. Ninja Theory are a development team founded in Cambridge, England. Frequently confused with those who popularized boob physics, they've been around since 2000, and as a result, have fought their way through this brutal industry that have claimed so many other studios. But it didn't immediately begin this way. Their first project, Kung Fu Chaos, was indicative of the way the industry used to function. Each console had their mascot and system sellers, but a great deal of releases found themselves in the middle market. These are releases made and produced by teams that included the most prolific, creating games that were elevated beyond prototypes, but without insane budgets and marketing. Microsoft, Sony, and Nintendo didn't build themselves on two extremes. Their markets were supported by a healthy ecosystem of the near-guaranteed successes that led a steady flow of new projects. The magic that came from this is when one of these middle market titles broke out into the mainstream, the owners could turn them into a AAA property. Plenty of franchises we love to this day can be traced back to this system. Rainbow Six, Hitman, Battlefield, Mafia, Dead Space, Beyond Good and Evil, Guitar Hero, Just Cause, Witcher, Crackdown, Call of Duty, and even Grand Theft Auto. And those are just the brands that are still being used today. That's not mentioning the one-offs and franchises left behind. Time Splitters, Battle Stations, Driver, Aggressive Inline, Eternal Darkness, Neverwinter Nights, Dark Cloud, Blood Rain, Sly Cooper, No One Lives Forever, Jet Set Radio, 13, Manhunt, Legacy of Kain, Rise of Nations, Freedom Fighters, Gun Valkyrie, and if I keep going, we'll be here all day. And these aren't all made by teams you've never heard of. Time Splitters is by many of the former employees behind GoldenEye and Perfect Dark, and went on to work on the cancelled Battlefront 3. Neverwinter Nights was done by BioWare, and its sequel by Obsidian. Dark Cloud's developer went on to make Ni no Kuni. No One Lives Forever is by Monolith. Manhunt was also done by Rockstar North. Freedom Force and SWAT 4 were developed by Irrational Games. Sly Cooper was by Sucker Punch. And the same team who made this Witcher went on to make this Witcher. But after the devastating market crash in 2008, the frequency of middle market releases plummeted, and the handful left were mostly relegated to smaller and less experienced developers. The rise of indie games through new avenues such as the Xbox Live Marketplace promoted smaller teams, but the strong core of the middle market was ceasing to exist. Developers were put on do-or-die projects such as Haze, Rage, Hitman Absolution, and Kingdoms of Amalur. The change in structure was catastrophic, with dozens of studios falling to the big-budget storm. Free Radical, Bizarre Creations, 38 Studios, Zipper Interactive, Studio Liverpool, 989, BlackRock, Evolution, Flagship, Chaos, Lionhead, LucasArts, Pandemic, Real-Time World, Silicon Knights, Snowblind, Zombie, and more. Some studios managed to survive, but it doesn't mean they weren't wounded in the battle. Eden Games was reopened, but with only 15 employees. id Software were hit with a slew of layoffs after Rage. Neversoft merged with Infinity Ward, and Raven Software are locked into assisting with Call of Duty instead of making their own excellent titles. The gaming industry is brutal, and Ninja Theory is well aware of it. Heavenly Sword, Enslaved, and DMC had enough of a cult following for the studio to remain in business, but none made a substantial profit. After completing their work for Disney Infinity, the time came for another big-budget release to begin development, but no publisher agreed to assist, and was scrapped. This is why Hellblade is so important. Slowly over the years, the metal market has made a return with franchises like Payday, Styx, Sniper Elite, Divinity, Stellaris, Killing Floor, and Rising Storm. These smaller teams were able to find enough success that bigger developers and publishers began to take notice and test the waters. Square Enix published Don't Nod's Life is Strange. Obsidian brought back the CRPG with Pillars of Eternity and Tyranny. And in this same week, Lawbreakers led by Cliffy B was released. Hellblade is an important milestone in this push for a more healthy and prominent middle market to assist the AAA industry in a way that indie games simply can't. For other developers to argue this point, Ninja Theory's efforts need to succeed, creatively and financially. Presentation is often used to refer to graphics, and while raw visuals may be the most overt aspect, there's a lot more that goes into presenting. And this is what I think separates Ninja Theory compared to DICE or Crytek. Not only are their games visually breathtaking, but they're meticulously detailed in all aspects, from sound design, music, and acting, to even the transitions and cutscene direction. In the opening to Enslaved, the player character is chasing after this woman who made escaping from their cells possible. Whenever your character is close to her, he's desperately begging for her help. Yet in this same sequence, it cuts to her perspective of seeing a brutish man screaming at her while banging on a door. Were these scenes portrayed entirely in gameplay, we'd view Tripp's actions as heartless or stupid, but because of the intelligent scene direction, players are able to empathize with both characters before they've even formally met, one through gameplay and the other through cutscenes. They've collaborated with multiple people and groups outside of the industry. Enslaved and DMC both involved Alex Garland, famed screenwriter of Sunshine, Dread, and Ex Machina, where he made his directorial debut. Andy Serkis acted and assisted in motion capture direction on Heavenly Sword and Enslaved. Noisia and Comic Christ made the score for DMC. Looking at this history, the high budgets and talent Ninja Theory worked with wasn't used as a gimmick. They were efforts to truly improve the experience they aimed for. But the lack of this money and expensive techniques and people would presumably hurt their newest release, one that doesn't have an Oscar-nominated writer, a Golden Globe-nominated actor, or a prolific band touring the world and listened to by millions. At first, Hellblade fails to impress with an opening that, while intriguing in its abnormal narration, has so little interaction and visual importance that it doesn't entail what the experience has in store for us. Thankfully, the game quickly improves and is confident to showcase Ninja Theory's talents. The only indication that this is a middle-market title is the bland main menu compared to DMC and Enslaved. Hellblade has the breathtaking visuals of its predecessors, and only further enhances the effects, art, and sound design. Incorporating engine resources, motion capture, and even live action, it all seamlessly blends to make for an experience that is neither low-budget nor traditionally high-budget in feel, lending the game a unique atmosphere for the player to immerse themselves. What makes the presentation superb is not just its technical witchcraft, but how it uses its high-fidelity visuals and sound to strengthen its themes and subject matter. Hellblade's player character Senua is one with severe mental illness, specifically psychosis, a condition that leads to hallucinations, seeing and hearing people or things that don't exist in objective reality. The plot may be simple, but the depth and immersion is what carries the experience. From the opening puzzle, you're with this suffering character. Multiple voices are heard constantly, repeating themselves and beating you over the head with mixed messages, encouraging your actions followed by an insult, doubting your abilities, triumph followed by fear. You're unable to find silence in the most mentally based sections of the game. These voices don't always listen to your character, and as a result, you also defy them. Not since Spec Ops has there been a game that's so committed to establishing a thematic tone, it's willing to involve the player through this struggle. Because it understands this is the power of the medium, that whether it's the brilliant power fantasy of Doom, a strategic commanding of civilization, or Hellblade's unflinching atmosphere, we're along for the ride. So it utilizes everything to emphasize and inhabit a part of Senua. I've seen a few people hesitant to play this game due to its camera and how close it is to the character. I found this to be only another part of the game's commitment. The introduction has one of Senua's many voices greeting you, as if you're another force within her, because as far as it's concerned, you are. To have the camera system from its spiritual predecessor simply wouldn't reinforce the connection between you and Senua. Combat encounters are intentionally claustrophobic and personal. Enemies tower over you, weapons they wield and their screams make 2 or 3 opponents seem overwhelming, as you're only able to inflict damage on one at a time. Combat is the opposite of DMC, with a wide camera, weapons designed to crowd control, and music that fuels your rage against demons. These demons aren't some greater evil, but deeply personal to the character, and the camera facilitates this. The combat itself has its empowerment and satisfaction, especially as you progress. Enemies that once intimidated are put down with an effortless stream of consecutive strikes and combos, and most importantly, these are accomplished by the player not from tutorials, move lists, or unlocks, but by the player's own discovery and growth. That may be the penultimate accomplishment here, its lack of a heads-up display for an intelligent fusion of visual and audio cues in and out of combat. The game never says press Y to attack or RB to dodge. Senua's ability is never explained to you in a menu, it's all learned through the trials you go through with her. The only element that is explained to you outside of the character and narrative is something to put the player under the same fear and paranoia Senua is in, and that leads to this game's most impressive achievement: how it portrays mental illness. It's a subject that visual media has had trouble executing because it has similar issues of exploring and understanding it in the real world, that it's not something that can be understood just by watching somebody. To someone who's never experienced hallucinations or hearing voices in their head, seeing someone else go through it has an innate disconnect between the audience and character. In games, there's an entirely new set of emotions and subjects that are easier and harder to portray. What they excel at are experiences rooted in direct feeling or control, something that happens to lend itself to this. What's brilliant about the portrayal here is that for all the horrors that Senua faces, her psychosis isn't purely evil or against her. In fact, the voices in her head are a rather ingenious way of assisting the player without breaking immersion. Being able to block or evade an enemy who snuck up behind you wouldn't be possible without the voices informing you of them, and leads to the player echoing the character's emotional ride, a constant rise and fall, at once broken and alone, and formidable and powerful in the next. Hellblade is an experience best played with as little information as possible, so I heavily advise skipping to this point in the video if you haven't played it. Spoilers will begin in 3, 2, 1. This all came to a head in the combat sequence just after the Warrior trials. I've discussed previously that in Spec Ops, it's not the mechanics that sell the combat, but the context they're put under. The same applies to the best of Hellblade. The visuals are unnerving to the core, but also striking. The music carries this surreal and thick layer of dread that you must overcome. Enemies come in one after another, but you will not stop. It was this determination that led to me finally discovering that this long death animation isn't locked, that you can use focus to recover and inflict significant damage to the enemy that put you down. The whole game is about defying illusions to accept the reality, and the game itself reflects this story. It's why the deaths look like a standard animation you're locked into, why the voices constantly discourage you, and yes, why the game threatens permadeath even though it's not real. The finale is the culmination. At this point, you have done everything that's needed, and even though we feel that there is one more deed, one more goal, the truth is all that's left is to admit it's the end. And it's time to move on, just like the character we spent our time through this journey with. Hellblade isn't important because of its quality. The game, both in design and tech, has problems. The visual puzzles that take up a good chunk of the game are very formulaic and can often drag for far too long, mainly because of the environmental design. Because the game's linear and environments are littered with invisible walls and long pathways with no room for variation, it leads to a lot of time spent walking instead of thinking. This comes to a head in the third act that's punctuated even more with combat sections that, unlike the rest of the game, feel completely arbitrary. Thankfully, it doesn't fall apart here in the vein of BioShock or Alien Isolation, and the ending is wonderfully effective, making up for any errors prior to it. The combat is intimate and personal, but in the beast section with tight environments, it's just too personal for its own good and becomes frustrating. The sight mechanic for puzzles is often extremely picky with how you align the sight. There's a current issue that seems to occur on AMD video cards where multiple sections suffer from significant frame rate drops. And finally, levels that are dependent on trial and error fail to deliver the emotional impact of combat and boss fights that are far more dynamic and interesting. But at the end of the day, these are issues that don't make me hesitant to recommend this game for a second. Hellblade would have been this year's most important game even without the quality, but its success at delivering a unique experience only raises its significance. What set it apart the most, though, is how next to nothing in this game had the tacky, tokenistic, and lack of personality that's crept into the AAA industry. When playing games, there's often a feeling that the developer doesn't actually care about certain aspects of its game. but are forced into making a show of caring. As I've said before, skins don't ruin Gears of War, headgear doesn't ruin Siege, and rec packs don't kill the arena, but they don't improve any of them. Every piece of Hellblade is created with passion, confidence, and love for the experience it delivers. And that love is something we all want to see more of. Knowing the last video was shorter than normal and had a proportionately large Q&A section, I felt that another video was called for. I hope that this was a pleasant surprise for you guys. What's your favorite video that you made for the channel so far? It's really tough. Stalker was probably the most fun video to make, and I love Spec Ops for being able to cover multiplayer because of you guys. Though if I have to pick one, it's probably Mass Effect 3 years later, simply for the conclusion in that video. Personally, that was my ultimate point, and the 3 videos were kind of just a build up to it. That was probably the most satisfying moment for me. Have you considered publishing a montage of the worst and most baffling moments from Spec Ops Alliance multiplayer? I've thought about it, but the time required would be pretty vast. And ultimately, while there's some pretty great and funny moments in there, compared to what else I do, I'm not sure it's going to be worth the time. But maybe I'll hand off to an editor, and I do have all the footage still recorded, so hopefully that can be used someday. What dead multiplayer are we going to revive for a day next? Probably Neo Tokyo. I got a surprising amount of comments mentioning it in my Ghost in the Shell video. I did play it years ago, but sadly the community was so tiny that I wasn't able to find any matches for it. However, the game does still have a very dedicated following, and since it's free to play, I think it'd be perfect to bring some subscribers on and play for a couple days. It'd be a pretty awesome project in the future. Favorite enemy you've encountered in a video game? The Imp, simply because I get to do this to him.
Can't stay away